Music. Sounds good. That was a pun.
All right, folks. It's not just me. Ash is gonna be dropping puns left and right, so hopefully you can put up with our shenanigans. This is the one topic I don't have as much. A lot of it's gonna be much more on a personal basis, but I do have a little bit of information. Who's the original composer for the game soundtrack? Well, that was Mitsuhiko Izumi, a TMT veteran who also composed the music for the previous arcade game in the series. So for those of you curious, the previous arcade game of the series, you had this one, which was called TMNT Turtles in Time. That was the arcade. And then TMNT, the arcade game, those are the two titles for the arcade cabinet. Ported, they were given numbers. That's why sometimes you're like, isn't this the same? Is it not? Is it the same? It is. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The consoles had a very specific way of numbering. This was arranged eventually. They had to go ahead and take it for the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo, and that's where these other individuals came into play. Kazuhiko Yuhara and Harumi Yuiko, both of whom went on to produce several Konami games, including the following TMNT game, Tournament Fighters. If you're curious, like, hey, the jams from Tournament Fighters in the Super Nintendo version sounds very similar to a lot of the tracks I hear in the Turtles 4, Turtles in Time version, you're not wrong. They used a lot of those songs similar. A lot of the same artwork was taken for that too. In addition to the original musical score, the attractive of the arcade game is noted for featuring the song Pizza Power. Wait a second, some of the music is different in the arcade. You're right. They had much more space so they could put on actual like full tracks and voices. That was taken from a TMT live concert known as Coming Out of Their Shells tour. So the game's music was released as part of the compilation album Konami All-Stars 1993. Music Station of Dreams was actually published by King Records back in 1992. Want to listen to the arcade's album? Look for that one. It's produced by King Records in 1992, then eventually on Konami All-Stars version of it, 1993. You can go ahead and check out that whole Coming Out of Their Shells tour, which is a bunch of the music they use for the arcade.
What? That's so cool.
Like, wait, what is going on right now?
Yo, as a kid, if I could find the soundtrack for a game, I was all about buying it. To know that they actually did have like a soundtrack, a record for it, and there was like a tour and stuff, that's really cool.
I was surprised how many different musical tours. That's one thing I didn't put in here. There was like a little bit too much I thought might take us too far away from everything. They had numerous musical tours, even Turtles on Ice types of expeditions. The Turtles IP was actually very, very, very popular for a long period of time.
I remember, I think even in kindergarten, I had like a Turtles backpack.
I actually had a Turtles thermos that will go inside of my Jurassic Park little lunchbox.
I love it.
Now, being a Konami game in the 16-bit era, the soundtrack is incredibly cool, fitting to the Turtles style, which the idea behind that meant it was going to be high tempo, and it was going to contain a mix of rock and action themes and comedic weirdness. Sometimes you're like, man, this is really banging, and then out of nowhere, you're like, that was a little bit silly. They wanted to represent that because that's how the Turtles were. There'd be so many times that you would often think, wow, these really are some badass Turtles. But you got characters like Mikey, or even have Donatello every now and then with a, oops, was that me? Those types of moments, because it was a mixture. They were teenagers. They weren't always going to be on top of the ball. They were going to make mistakes, and those mistakes they were able to exemplify with even the music itself. Several of the tracks incorporate remixes of the classical cartoon theme. Wait a second, but I thought the Super Nintendo version, I remember it feeling like it was the TV show. You're not wrong. Absolutely right. They just had to remix it because they couldn't play the whole song because the whole song would be too powerful. So they did remixed versions so it could fit and they could be able to do what they wanted to do for the most part for the game. Most of these tunes of them being, I don't know if I want to use the term dumbed down versus curated appropriately. You can still hum them years and years after the fact because they were that catchy and that easy to remember. That was a really cool thing to take into consideration when thinking about the Turtles music on the game. You know what? I do catch myself humming it if I'm playing the game or hours and hours after I played it that night. I'm like, wait, was I just still humming the level 3's theme? Okay, I gotta calm down.
And that's especially important for a game in this style. Like you said earlier, in order to get good at the game, you've got to practice it a lot, right? So that means you're playing it a lot.
True.
It means you got to hear it a lot. So they want it to be stuck in your brain.
The ones that were stuck in my brain the most, my two favorite tracks, now these are both from the Super Nintendo version. Excuse me, folks. Neon City Night Riders is my favorite one. Second favorite one is Sewer Surfing. Now, these are actually both the auto scroller levels, so you actually get a little bit more time to enjoy it because you're not just focused on killing the enemies. You might be dodging them, but you're like, I can just kind of sit back. The game's going to move forward on its own for me. All right. And so both of those tracks still resonate with me to this day.
Let me tell you all about the music of Streets of Rage. It's very awesome if you've never heard it. It's very, very awesome. From the first time that I played Streets of Rage 2 and I saw this intro that you see here, man, the music just blew me away. So hooked just based on the fact. Personally, yeah, gameplay is important, story is important, but if the music is really, really, really good, I will play a crappy game if the music is really that awesome. And not saying that this is a crappy game, the music just really drew me in and just made the entire experience so much better. The music for Streets of Rage 1 through 3 was composed by Yuzo Koshiro. A lot of people did work on the Streets of Rage 4 soundtrack as well. It was overseen by Olivier I think I might be mispronouncing his name, but Derevery or something like that. Could be off. He was supposed to compose the entire soundtrack. However, he was extremely conflicted with whether to make it an ode to the past or to kind of redo the whole thing. Felt like if he made it an ode to the past, it was gonna kind of cheapen the past music, and especially being that he wanted to be very respectful of Koshiro's work. All right, let me just oversee it, and then I'll bring a lot of people on. They'll do different parts of the soundtrack. So that's how the fourth one ended up being.
I love that.
It was really cool. Olivier Derevery, he was known for doing Alone in the Dark, and Yuzo Koshiro at the time, he was known for doing Revenge of Shinobi and ActRaiser. And y'all know how much I love the soundtrack for ActRaiser. It's so good. Yuzo Koshiro was really inspired by rave music in Tokyo. He wanted this game to kind of feel like a Tokyo rave, which is what I was referring to earlier when I was talking about the art style of the game and the bright, loud colors and how everything is really bright on dark backgrounds or set at night. He wanted everything to feel kind of like a rave. The night lights and neons in like the street signs and stuff. He was inspired by a lot of funkadelic rave music. He wanted it to feel and imitate life versus make a video game soundtrack that sounds like video game music. He really wanted it to sound like real life. When the game was released, people were inspired by that music. There were actually musical tours. He did like DJ sets where he would play this music. Other artists were like inspired by the music. The thing that I found the most impressive about how he developed all the music was that he wrote his own programs to create the beats. Some of it was he modified stuff to create his own stuff. There was like programs that he just straight up made from scratch to create the sounds that he wanted. I mean, the sound chip for the Sega Genesis was different than the Super Nintendo. Like some people will say it has like more limitations. They really pushed the hardware to the max when they were creating all of this music. He used outdated hardware that he modified. He managed to make the Genesis really sing using its Yamaha YM2612 sound chip, as well as the Master System's PSG chip. He produced a range of crisp, realistic percussion samples through the available PCM channel and used a combination of FM synth and PSG for the rep. When you read some of that, they also say like, if you don't know about the limitations of the Genesis or like the Sega Master System and what it was like capable of back then, they tell you like, go and check out those sounds. What it's able to produce and what he was able to produce, it was just like, it blew everyone away. Magazines and stuff rated the games, like they were like writing their reviews or whatever. They always said like, the music in this game is, everyone take note of what he's doing because this is like really, really, really awesome and innovative. That's where like the music for the first and second one came from. There's lots of R&B and hip hop influences. There's a lot of synthwave. In the fourth one, they wanted to make sure that there were notes of the 80s to make it feel like they made that music back then. And the cool thing that I think about, like in Streets of Rage 4, Yuzo Koshiro was making the music because he did have like a little bit of tracks that he made himself. He specifically got hardware from the 90s to build music notes for this game. So he had like drum machines that he used that were like from the 90s, so you could get that 90s sound. And it's like really cool when you think about it and listen to some like Daft Punk. There's this guy that did a track for them, and he was talking about how he made the click. He made this click sound. He said that that click sound became synonymous with that time in music. When you really think about like, okay, the fact that he like went back, tried to find this drum machine because he really wanted to like make this authentic sound for Streets of Rage 4, it like makes sense. Oh wait, you hear music that's made now and you're like wondering like, why does it kind of sound off? Like it sounds like it's trying to be like what the past was, but if you actually use the tools from the past, like then you're gonna get like exactly what you're looking for. So that's what he did. And I thought that was really, really cool. In Streets of Rage 3, he developed an automated and sophisticated system to produce fast beats by computer. At first, when you think about that, you're like, wait, that's kind of weird. It's going to make it sound artificial. Actually adds to the story. Part of the story that they developed for Streets of Rage 3 had @𝐖𝐈𝐓 like components to the story, which when we get into the lore, we'll talk about that. Totally makes sense and ties in all of those theming. When you start to dig into like all of these little things, you're like, dang, yo, they are really creating art out here. Like they didn't even I didn't even realize that this thing was related to that thing, and this art made this thing stand out more. And that's what I thought was like so cool about learning all this stuff. You play the game, you have fun with it, but then you realize, wait a minute, there's like people creating art with this stuff. Like this is like so awesome.
Like
so
literal masterpieces. Like we get to see what they decide to sell to the consumer, right? But there was so much more that went to it. You are hitting so many nails in the head right now. Amazing.
You like wonder why some of this so much of this music gets stuck in our head.
Right.
Well, it's because it's by design, you know. They really want this stuff to get stuck in your head.
Big time.
One thing that I did forget to bring up about Streets of Rage 2, oh no, Streets of Rage 4, is that there is major demand for the soundtrack on iTunes. Like I guess it's like when the game came out, it was like super duper duper popular and everybody wanted to download this soundtrack. I mean, it's kind of common. I think it's only becoming common more nowadays because people are into like collecting records and stuff of these, and like they're finally doing presses of stuff, like, you know, like you can go on like Fangamer and stuff like that and finally get like presses of the music. Oh, Bobby has decided to join us. Sorry. The most important thing with the development of the Streets of Rage 1, Streets of Rage 2, and Streets of Rage 3 music is that he wanted that techno 80s like sound of music to really come through. He really wanted it to emulate life. And the artists that were inspired by a lot of the Streets of Rage music was Technotronic. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them. It sounded familiar to me.
Yeah, it sounds
Enigma, Black Box, and Soul to Soul.
Wow. So not just one, but numerous artists.
Yeah, and I didn't know that at the time. Wait a minute. People like actual like other music artists are like being influenced by this like music. It's not just people obsessed with video games like me. That's really cool.
I feel like that sometimes like some of that information was almost not put out to the masses back then. They missed an opportunity to make it even more relatable to us.
Exactly. Like literally as soon as you started saying that, like it's exactly what I started thinking. Yes, exactly. Because like think about how much more you would be invested all of these games if you knew how much of a cultural impact it was also having.
Great example of what you're talking about right now is when we're finding about like individuals like Henry Cavill and, oh my gosh, the new Batman, brain is melting.
Pattinson?
Yeah, Pattinson, yeah. So those individuals, they are massively into gaming culture. You have people saying, oh my gosh, have my babies. Oh my gosh, this is such like a big thing to hear, you know, gamers being actors and and big time actors, like profile, top of the line type of actors, and it's making them relatable instead of unfathomable. Mostly when we think about like an actor or actress, we're like, oh, they're up in the stars, you know what I mean? That's why they're called the Hollywood stars. It's unbelievable. I'll never be that, you know? And it's like, wait a second, Henry, you out there playing some Witcher? You know what? That's pretty freaking
Let me find
sweet.
out.
Let's go. Let's go. Tell me your favorite boss that you fought.
Yeah,
You can
and
have
that's
a real
cool thing
convo.
too. Just as a person like who really loves music, like finding out like some of your favorite video games were sampled in music, it's like really, really, really cool. Like there have been times where I was listening to Kanye West, for example, and he used like a Street Fighter sample, or like somebody uses like a Chrono Trigger sample, and you're like, what? That's awesome. They're playing the same games I'm playing.
Yes, like there's different rappers or whoever they might have used a sound sample, like you said. Like I know, like Lupe Fiasco at one point in time when he was a thing, he had a sound sample from Street Fighter, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's so cool. Was the song still standing as good to this day? Well, that sample portion still does. The rest of the song I don't necessarily care for, but that impact, because it's taking two different things that I love, right? Music and music from video games, and merging them together. It's like, yo, I'm gonna really give this a chance now, because you are hitting two things instead of just one.
Video games aren't just for people who are into video games. Like it's for everybody.
Absolutely right. Yes.
Streets of Rage 2 was developed using a PC-88. The music was developed using a PC-88. And like I said, programs that he made himself. The language that he used, like some of the programs that he developed himself, was called Music Macro Language, or MML. And he used it on all of the Streets of Rage that he developed. I thought that that was really cool. The fact that he developed his own program and his own ways to create these beats. That's a part of the reason why the music is so iconic, because it really pushed the hardware to the limit.
That shows somebody who really wanted the music to be that important to the title, not just as something that has to be there as background noise, but it wanted to be a prominent aspect. They made their own program that will now fit with inside the parameters they need for the video game. That, Ash, what a great find. That is an Easter egg and a half. Wow.